15 years or so, I think it's fair to say that progressive music, modern jazz if you like, has become less and less accessible to a large public as it's abandoned melody and shunned harmony and become full of the most complex rhythms. And as the music of free-form improvisation has become more difficult, not to say obscure, so the musicians and their followers have become something of a self-contained minority, somewhat hostile to the larger world, suspicious of commercialism and contemptuous of popularity. Keith Jarrett occupies a very unusual position in the world of progressive music because he is both admired and revered by the purists, the critics and musicians alike. And he's also very popular, widely thought of as one of the most brilliantly inventive improvisers of all time. Moreover, Jarrett seems to avoid many of the wilder unorthodoxies, the kind of hard and fast life that some jazz musicians seem to find obligatory. He lives out here with his wife and children in the New Jersey woods in a style of life that's actually more reminiscent of the all-American Mr. Clean than it is of Charlie Parker. When he's here, he spends most of his time in that specially built studio behind the trees there, playing his pianos. much of what you were playing did you know that you were going to play when you sat down?
None of it. In terms of content, none. I knew I had 10 minutes in which to play whatever it would be. But that 10 minutes was a severe limitation on how loose I could be about it, so...
So you didn't even have the opening notes in mind?
No. I just put my hand there and...
And that leads from one thing to the next?
Sometimes. It doesn't always follow that it leads to anything else. And it isn't necessarily bad that it doesn't, but yes, that's the theory.
That sounds like a definition of pure improvisation.
That's what a lot of people say. I myself am a pawn to this whole thing. If I had an overview on it, on what improvisation was, I'm afraid that I would turn into an improvisation ecologist. So I either am going to be in there, inside the process of improvising, or I'm going to be on the outside wondering what it is and coming up with a theory and an answer.
But there is a clear difference between the kind of improvisation that you've just shown us and the kind that, say, Oscar Peterson or other known pianists would offer, in the sense that they take a tune, they embellish it, they change it around, and you arrive back at some kind of representation of what it was.
Yeah, I just had a revelation while you asked me that question, because in answer to that question, yes, you're right, there's a big difference between what they do in public, but I wonder if they don't do what I do at home and are afraid to take the risk in public. If you're a painter, you're not risking that. You're painting it, then you're giving it to somebody. And the risk is already on the painting. You're not sitting there screaming at the audience and hoping they understand you, you know.
As you grew up, did you have it in mind to be a classical concert pianist?
Well, I was pretty young, so I was just doing what I was basically taught, not having any alternative. But that's what I did. I don't think I knew I was going to keep playing the piano, but I don't think I made any of those judgments. When you're 7, 8, 9, you don't really know what that means anyway. But I was giving concerts and memorizing 2 hours worth of music. I remember changing other people's notes before I would play a concert. I might not like Mozart's couple last notes. I remember a concerto, I didn't like some of the notes at the end, so I would play them my way at home, and when I went to the teacher, I would play them right.
When you play a solo concert, as far as I understand it, you go on, you don't know what you're going to play, you start playing, and you go on playing for as long as it takes you to finish. That does seem a very extraordinary way to approach a public concert, and I don't know of anybody else who's doing that.
No, I don't either, which would explain a lot of the reason why there's interest in it, but the whole thing seems to have started from the possibility of realizing much more. I mean, if you're playing alone, you have complete, utter control of not only the sound but also the silence. And it turned very quickly from a musical adventure to play solo to a spiritual exercise, kind of. But it's a continuing exercise which I have yet to, I'm sure I'll never totally succeed in playing a completely improvised concert. I don't think that shouldn't even be conceivable. I can say it's totally improvised, meaning it came up, but I am not always in a state of complete letting go.
What do you do if you don't reach the point of letting go?
Well, I don't usually cry or anything. I don't know, there aren't any, I wouldn't call them tricks, but I have to be there and I have to do something. The only alternative I might have would be to get up and walk off and say, just a minute, I'll be back. But that would be too easy.
very touchy about the labels that critics might put on his music. He doesn't like to be called a jazz musician, still less a member of the jazz avant-garde. The only title that he's glad to accept is that of musician. And his range is indeed so wide as to make orthodox analysis very difficult, as jazz critic Benny Green explains.
The conventional jazz musician takes a piece of music which consists of melody, rhythm and harmony, throws the melody out, sometimes adjusts the rhythm, but takes hold of those harmonies and plays melodic variations based upon them. That's where the logic and the form comes, in the harmonic sequence. But what do we find when we study Jarrett? We find that certain elements of the conventional performance are very much there. Number one, he's playing a piano. And that's not a joke, because musicians these days often play things that electricians and mechanics have to build. Jarrett's actually playing a conventional instrument. Number two, you notice that when he starts his ruminations, he often maintains a steady tempo, steady rhythm and tempo, without changing for 2, 3, 4 minutes at a time. And yet again, once he gets into a kind of a groove, he often stays in the same key for quite a long period. So what do we find? We find conventional elements, a conventional sound, a conventional tempo and rhythm, and a conventional tonality. That is why Jarrett is easy to listen to in comparison to some avant-garde players, because the elements of conventional jazz are there. But having said that, we have to add that Jarrett is a very unusual case. Sometimes he goes to concerts and he does throw everything aside and just fly. So Jarrett is in effect several players. Sometimes he's an avant-garde anarchist and sometimes he isn't. That's why it's impossible to categorize him.
Do you never feel inclined to protect yourself by having prepared pieces?
Once in a while, an encore will be a piece that I have maybe enjoyed playing a few times, and maybe it has even come up as an encore out of improvisation. It's called My Song. It was something that happened in the midst of improvisation at a concert, and I happened to have taped it.
Keith Jarrett's position is unique in that he amalgamates so many of the themes and traditions of American music, from orchestral composition to free-form solo improvisation, from the most extreme forms of bop to sweet melody, including on the way everything from Gershwin to gospel. This isn't a very safe place for Jarrett to be, spread across the canons of American music, but safety isn't in the nature of his work.